Hi everyone, and welcome to Inverter Always. I'm Dana, and in today's video we're going to discuss how to use your new Daikin Navigation Remote Controller, or NAV Controller for short. Now this video has a lot to cover, so it's going to be a little bit longer than normal. I'm going to go ahead and put timestamps below so that you can jump from section to section a little more easily. Now, let's jump right in. Alright you guys, so before we get started, I want to give you guys just a quick little overview on the NAV controller. We have done 2 videos prior to this one. We did an installation video, I'll link that at the top now. And then before that we did a general features and overview video all about the NAV controller. I'll go ahead and I'll link that at the top now as well. The NAV controller though, this is what it looks like. On the back you'll see it has 2 little screws here. It connects to indoor units that have P1, P2 terminal connections. Really, all that you need to know is it's compatible with many of the Daikin indoor units, but not all of them. So this is not a universal controller for anything Daikin. It does have specific compatibilities. If you have an indoor unit that's not compatible with this NAV controller, don't fear, because there is going to be a NAV controller coming out soon. Depending on when you watch this video, it's November 2020, and soon from now there's going to be a NAV controller that's compatible with other mini split indoor units such as S21. That's another terminal connection. But right now P1, P2 is the only connection you can use the NAV controller on. So if you are a homeowner or a commercial building tenant and you have one of these installed at your house or at your building, you probably want to know, how the heck do I use it and how do I use it with the system that I have installed? And that's what we're going to cover today. So the first thing you need to know about the NAV controller is when you press any of these buttons, the first thing that's going to happen, the backlight turns on. I'll go ahead and do this with you guys as we go along in the video today, up at the top left of your screen, so just right up here. The backlight will illuminate, and the backlight has to be on before any of the buttons you press actually work. And this is intentional. This is so that if this is installed on your wall, and you walk by, or the kids walk by and press a button, or you brush up against the NAV controller on accident, you don't turn your unit off or change it from heat to cool in the middle of the winter, or vice versa in the middle of the summer. So always make sure that the backlight is illuminated, it's on, before you press any of the buttons. Now as far as the buttons go, this is a very simple to use controller. Yeah, it's not the prettiest controller, but as we've discussed in prior videos on the NAV controller, its functionality gives you everything that you need. So from a functionality perspective, I really like this controller a lot. The on-off button has a green LED. So if you want to turn your unit on, you walk up, you make sure the backlight's on, press the on-off button, and the green LED will turn on. If you walk by your controller and the green LED is not lit, then that means your unit is off. If it's operating in the heat mode and you want to change the mode to cooling, or vice versa, you simply just press the mode button. If you want to change the fan speed, it's the fan speed button. It really is as simple as that. If you're in any of the menus and you need to back out or escape at any time, you just press the cancel button. And while you're heating or cooling, if you're uncomfortable and you want to change the temperature in the room, the up red arrow is to increase the set point, i.e. make it warmer. The blue down arrow is to decrease the set point, i.e. make it cooler. Your left and your right arrows are mostly used to navigate through the different menu options, but if you do run dual set points, which means you're heating to 70 and you're cooling to 72, then to move from your heat to cool set point, your left and right arrows will do that for you. Right in the middle of the controller there's a big round button that says menu and OK, and it serves 2 purposes. When you press the menu button, it takes you into the menu. It also is your enter button. So after you have selected an item in the menu to change and you want to change it, you hit the OK button and it selects that item. That's all there is to it. Now, there are 3 different display options in the NAV controller. Straight out of the box, you have what's called the standard display. And the standard display is going to give you the active set point, mode, and fan speed. And that's it. It does not give you room temperature, it does not give you louver position. So if you have a wall mount or a cassette that has a louver, it doesn't show you the position that that's at. It just gives you the bare bones, meat and potatoes information. If you want to change this, you have two options. You have the simple display, which makes the room temperature nice and big. And then you have a detailed display that also gives you room temperature, but it's much smaller, same size as the set point, and it adds in the clock in case you want to see the clock. Now, before we get into any of your menu settings specifically, it's really important we understand how the navigation controller works. So the first thing that you need to know about operating your NAV controller, or any of your heat pump systems for that matter, is which indoor unit is the master, because the master is the only unit that can pick what mode the system runs in. Now anytime you have one indoor, one outdoor, that's an easy one because it's the only indoor unit connected, so it's the master. But what happens when you have multiple indoor units installed? If you look at a VRV application and you have all NAV controllers connected, one to each indoor unit, it's actually really easy. One of these units is going to be set up as the master during the installation process by the technician, and you know which controller is the master because at the top there's no icon, it's blank at the top. All of the other NAV controllers are going to have an icon at the top that say master controlled. They're telling you, hey, we're not the master, we're being master controlled. So you know then you need to find the NAV controller at your house that's blank at the top, because that's the only controller that can choose the mode of operation of the heat pump system. All the other NAV controllers can pick their own set points, their own fan speeds, on off. It's just the mode that gets picked by the main master controller. Now, when the master controller is in the heat mode, all of your other NAV controllers are going to go to heat as well on a VRV system. If the NAV controller that's the master switches to cooling, then all of the other NAV controllers are also going to switch to cooling. The reason for this is because comparing what VRV logic does to mini-split multi-zone systems, any indoor unit on a mini-split can choose whatever mode it wants, but only the master is the one that actually gets to tell the heat pump what to do. The problem with that is that all of the indoor units that are maybe in the opposite mode as the master just shut off. They go to standby, but they don't operate. They don't run the fan, they don't do anything. So what happens a lot of time in the real world is a mini-split system owner is going to call and say, hey, my unit's not working properly, I see a flashing green light up at the indoor unit, there's a problem, come out, take a look, and the whole entire time it was, nope, you just had indoor units that were in the opposite mode as the master. So when you go to the VRV side of things, VRV really kind of just mitigates that whole problem entirely, because now everyone's going to be in the same mode no matter what. If the master's in auto, then it's either going to be in auto heat or it's going to be in auto cooling, which means if it's in auto heat, all of the other NAV controllers that are master controlled will automatically switch to heat, and when the master switches to auto cool, because of the set point and room temperature difference, all of the other NAV controllers will switch to cool. Remember that they all have their own set points, so you don't lose out on any of that functionality. You just don't get to pick the mode from any of the master controlled controllers. Now, what is a neat feature is if the master's in heating or cooling, all of your master controlled NAV controllers can always pick fan mode. So they're not heating or cooling, they're just running the fan for circulation. Very neat feature to have. If the master controller switches to the fan mode though, then everybody's locked into the fan mode. So depending on how you want to look at this, this might be a really good way to punish the kids if they've misbehaved. Guess what, kids? No heating or cooling today. You get fan only. Now, sometimes you might have a master controller that you don't want set as the master. Maybe there's a different NAV controller installed at your house or at your building or at your school, and you want that one to be the master. I'm going to show you very easily how to change the master NAV controller. First thing you're going to need to do is locate the current master. So the current master controller is the one that does not have an icon at the top that says master controlled. If you walk up to a NAV controller and at the top it says master controlled, that's not the master. You need to find the master. Once you've located the master controller, you're going to press any button to illuminate that backlight. Remember, the backlight has to be on before we actually press any buttons. With the backlight illuminated, now all you have to do is press and hold the mode button until master controlled starts blinking at the top. And what you've done now is you have reset which NAV controller is the master. Because right now, with all of them blinking, none of them are the master. With them blinking, now walk over to the NAV controller that you do want set up as the master. Simply illuminate the backlight, and then all you have to do is press the mode button one time, and bada bing, bada boom, now you've moved your master controller. So if for some weird reason you had one of the bedrooms get set up as the master controller, or maybe you're upstairs, or maybe an office that's not being utilized, you can change it to the office that is being utilized, or you can change it from upstairs to downstairs, or vice versa, or you can move it to your master suite, whatever you want. Just remember at the end of the day that one NAV controller is the master, all the rest are master controlled, and in order to change the mode of your system, you have to change it at the master. One other thing I'd like to point out, you guys, is that changing the master from one NAV controller to another, it's not going to hurt the system. You can do this as often as you'd like. The only thing you need to make sure you do is if you're using the schedule, make sure you program the schedule on the NAV controller currently set up as the master. If you move the master to a new NAV controller, make sure you then program the schedule at the new master, because that does not move from NAV controller to NAV controller. All you're doing is changing which NAV controller is the master, picking the mode of operation. Now, on heat recovery systems, typically every single NAV controller is a master, because each NAV controller that's wired to its indoor unit is piped to a dedicated port of the branch box. Each port of the branch box is like a mini heat pump. So the only time you're going to have master controlled NAV controllers is when you have multiple indoor units all piped back to a single port of a branch box. Now it's going to act like what we've been talking about, where you'll have the master NAV controller and then you'll have a master controlled NAV controller, or multiple master controlled NAV controllers. This is most common when you have multiple small offices that are all right next to each other. They have the same load, the same exposure, and generally they should not be operating in different modes. So sometimes, to save money, we'll put them on the same port of a branch box, and then the only thing you have to determine is which one's going to be the master. Now, before we talk about schedule or off timers or anything that's inside the menu options, we need to talk about how to change the set point. Now that we know how to change the mode, now that we know which one's the master, which one gets to pick the mode, we need to talk about how to change your set points. Within the NAV controller, there's your heat set point and your cool set point, and it's important that you know which one you're changing, because when you walk up to the NAV controller and it says heat at the top, the set point that's displayed is the heat set point. So many times we'll have people call in and they'll say, hey, I keep lowering the set point, but the cooling won't come on, or I keep increasing the set point, but the heat won't come on. And it's important to note that when you're changing your set point, you're only changing the active set point. So if it says heat on the NAV controller, that means you're changing the heat set point. If you're cold and you want more heat, all you have to do is turn it up by pressing the red up arrow. Similarly, if you're too warm, but you don't necessarily need air conditioning, you just want to lower the heat set point, all you have to do is press the blue down arrow, and that will lower the heat set point. When you actively want to change the mode though, hey, I'm too warm, I want cooling right now, that's when you need to press the mode button, change it from heating to cooling, and then you're going to go ahead and change the cooling set point. Now it takes about 5 seconds to change the active set point when you change the mode. So when I change the mode by pressing the mode button and I go from heat to cool, wait for 5 seconds, the set point is going to update, and now the cooling set point will be displayed. And once the cooling set point's displayed, now you can press up and down to change the cooling set point to what you need. The only time you're going to be able to see both the heating and cooling set points displayed on the nav at the same time is if you are at the master and the master is in auto, and if you're using dual set points. So out of the box, if you haven't changed anything, Then when you put it in auto, you'll have your heat and your cool set point displayed on the right hand side, and you can toggle between them with the left and right arrows. And once you've highlighted which set point you want changed, you just hit the up and down arrows to change that set point. But most of the time, if you're not in auto, you're either going to be in heating or cooling. Regardless if you are the master or the master controlled nav, always remember that you're changing the active set point. It's also important to note that everything we've been talking about is for heat pump and heat recovery systems that do not have what's called a central controller. If you're on a commercial application or a gigantic house that has a central controller, typically the central controller is going to handle the auto mode, and you will no longer be able to use auto at the NAV controller. The other thing that's going to be really important is the information we've covered about auto mode in this video is for dual set point applications. If you have a single set point application, or your settings have been adjusted by the technician and you don't have two set points when you put it in auto, then that's okay. It's just now you're auto to one particular set point, so it will heat and cool to that set point. When you're a master controlled NAV controller, it's still just in heat to the heat set point. If it changes to cooling, then it's just cooling to the cooling set point. Alright you guys, so one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear about how should I be using my inverter heat pump system is, should I be using a schedule? And in my opinion, I actually prefer to not use a schedule on VRF and inverter mini split systems because they're designed to maintain space temperature. You'll hear your technician tell you, set it, leave it, forget it. And there's a reason we tell you that. The inverter heat pump systems do not recover well. It's not that they can't recover when you set your set point to 60 all night long and first thing in the morning you want 70 degrees, that's great, and they'll get you there. It's just they're not designed to do that. So they're going to use a lot of energy in order to recover that 10 degrees. The way you want to operate your system is find a temperature that's comfortable for you in each room and then leave it at that temperature all the time. I never change my house from 70, maybe 1 degree, 71, 69. But even when we leave, I go to work, or when we go on vacation, I don't change it. I don't turn it off. There's no need. It costs less money to maintain my house than it would if I had turned it off or set it way back and then come back home either from work or from vacation and then had to recover 10 degrees. And that's not even talking about what happens when it's really cold out in the middle of the winter. I'm in the Northwest, it's 24 degrees outside, and now I need to recover 10 degrees. My heat pump's going to be derated, it's going to struggle, it's going to take longer, it's going to use more energy, and I'm not going to be as comfortable in the process. So my recommendation is always set it, leave it, forget it. That compressor ramped down as low as possible is the best thing you can do to save money and keep all of your rooms as consistently heated or cooled as possible. Now, with that being said, there's nothing wrong with setting your temperature back 2 or 3 degrees in the evening hours. You like to sleep with the room a little cooler at night, that's fine. 60 from 70, that's a little ridiculous. But 70 to 67, that's totally fine. In the morning, when you need to recover from 67 to 70, that's super easy to do. So if you set a schedule to set back in the evening hours from 70 to 67, just for example purposes, then how do I do that? So when you go into the menu, you do this by pressing the menu button right in the middle of the NAV controller. Don't forget, illuminate the backlight first. And we'll do this up at the top here as well together. Don't do the schedule yet. The reason I say that is because in order to set your schedule, you have to have had the clock set already. And it will notify you to set the clock if you have not done this already. Many times during the installation process, the technician didn't set the clock, and that's okay. I don't set the clock on any of the NAV controllers I'm commissioning either. It's just one of those things on the main menu that the user can do should they want to. So to set the clock, you're actually going to go down from the main menu into the second page, and you'll see your clock settings. Now, before you set your clock, I recommend that you set daylight savings time first. If you set the clock and then you set daylight savings time, and we're currently in daylight savings time, when you go back to the main screen, you're going to be an hour ahead of what you should be. So do the daylight savings time first, and then set the clock. Once you've done this, it's going to take you back to the main screen every time you enter and save a setting, and unfortunately that's just part of the process. Not all settings are like this, but it does get a little bit tedious. It goes quick after you've done it once or twice. Once you set the clock, go back into the menu, now go to schedule. Now there's going to be 3 things you have to set at the schedule. The first thing is enable, disable. You want to enable your schedule. Once you enable the schedule, you now need to pick your schedule pattern preferences. And what that means is, do you want the same schedule every day? Do you want a different schedule every day? Do you want a weekday weekend schedule? Do you want to split Saturday and Sunday off? Like, how do you want it set up? You pick. Once you've done that, the last thing you need to do is you need to change the actual schedule settings. So go back into schedule. From the main screen, go down to settings, and here's where we're going to set up the actual schedule. So what you're going to see, each row of your settings is an action. And the way that this works is you're going to set an action to take place at a particular time, and then that one-time command is going to be sent out to that NAV controller. So let's say we're going to pick 7 a.m. and we're going to tell the NAV controller to turn on, and we're going to tell it to heat to 70 degrees, and maybe we're going to tell it to cool to 72 degrees. Great. It's going to do that every single day that we've programmed it to. Let's say it's just an everyday schedule, one schedule that we do every single day just to keep it easy. Now we can program another action. So if we want to program at noon to go from 70 to 68 because maybe I'm working a swing shift, and so I'm going to be leaving the house at noon. I'm not going to be back until midnight. Great. At noon, set back to 68 degrees. So you're going to plug in 12 p.m. on, heat 68, and maybe cooling, you go back to 74. Now you get home at midnight and you'd like it to be comfortable, so maybe you schedule the next row to be 11 p.m., maybe an hour before you get home, on, heat to 70, cool back down to 72. Now I'm home, enjoying my house, blah, blah, blah. I go to sleep, and maybe at nighttime, it's kind of an odd schedule, but at 6 a.m. I decide I'm going to go to sleep now. Okay, great. From 6 to noon, I'm going to have it be 67, 75 degrees for cooling, and that's going to be my nighttime sleep schedule. You don't have to fill in all those lines. And if you want to leave some of them dashed, then that means there will be no change taken. So every morning, if you set the controller to be on and you set your heating and cooling set points, but then on the next row down you just leave the command dashed, there will be no change. So you don't have to tell it to turn on every single time. Now, one of the important things to note about this is the schedule does not override or lock you out when you program an action. It's a one-time occurrence. So if you program heat 70 degrees at 7 a.m., it does this at 7 a.m. But after that, if you want to change it, you can change it. So I can walk up to the nav and change it to 71, change it to 72, whatever I want. And then nothing else happens until the NAV controller is told to then change again, which usually occurs at the evening schedule, whatever that is. So just remember that this isn't locking it in. People ask all the time, hey, when am I going to have the ability to, change it? This happens on schools a lot. Is the teacher going to be able to change the set point, during class, or is it going to go to 70 in the morning and then just be locked out all day long? And just from the schedule's point of view, it's a one-time action. So every time you want something to change, automatically you need to schedule that action to change. Congratulations, you guys. You've successfully programmed the schedule. Now let's start going through some of the other items within the menu of the NAV controller. So if you have an indoor unit that has a louver, wall mount, a cassette style unit, ceiling suspended, anything that has a louver that blows air in different directions, within the main menu at the top there will be an option that says airflow direction. And selecting this option gives you the ability to manually change the direction of the louvers, anything from position 0, which is blow air across the room, all the way down to position 4 or 5, depending on the unit that you have installed, which is blowing the air more down. Typically in cooling, we like to blow air across, which is the default, And in heat, we like to blow the air down, which is the default for heat, but you can do anything in between for either of the modes, as well as oscillation or swing function. So it'll actually swing back and forth automatically, consistently all the time. Now, if you're looking at the items displayed in your menu on your NAV controller compared to maybe what I have up on my NAV controller, they may be different. That's because each indoor unit has a different availability of settings and features. What's neat about the NAV controller is it will not display a feature for your indoor unit unless it's available on your indoor unit. So as you're going down through the list of things, there may be some features like on the round flow cassettes. If you have a commercial application, they actually have filter panels that will clean themselves. There's an option to program that. We're not talking about any of those features today. We're only talking about the features available on pretty much all of your indoor units. So the next one that we need to talk about just briefly is the off timer. If you enable the off timer and then set it for example purposes of 2 hours, then anytime you turn on your NAV controller, it will run however you have it set up. Let's say heat set to 70 for that allotted time of 2 hours, and then it will automatically shut off. You then would have to manually turn it back on or have the schedule turn it on at a certain time period, at which point it would run for 2 hours and then automatically shut off. The reason I don't recommend or prefer, in my opinion, to use the off timer is because the inverter heat pump systems are designed to be on, maintaining space temperature all the time. I don't want mine turning off. Also, we have a lot of calls that come in where people will say, hey, my unit randomly turns off. Why? Well, the only way your unit can turn off is if you scheduled it to turn off, if you have the off timer enabled, or if you manually turn it off. You can't lose power and then when power is restored, just have it be off, because we actually have a feature built into all the indoor units where if you lose power and then at some point in the future power is restored, the system will go back to doing whatever it was doing before it lost power. So that isn't an option. If you have an error code, it will be blinking on the NAV controller, so it'll indicate to you there's a problem. It will never just turn off. The only way it turns off is if you turn it off, schedule it to turn off, or enable the off timer. So just to prevent confusion and to operate the system the way it's designed, don't enable the off timer. The next one's really easy. At the very bottom of the menu, there's an option to change the language. Now in North America, all the NAV controllers shipped by default are set up for English, but if you prefer Spanish or French, you can change it here. You only have 3 options in North America. There are other options in other countries around the world, but for us, it's either English, Spanish, or French. Also by default in North America is the temperature calibration, which is set up for Fahrenheit. If you want to change it to Celsius, you can easily do this in the main menu as well by selecting Celsius Fahrenheit and then just simply changing it from there. Alright you guys, we're almost done. One of the last things we're going to talk about from the main menu today is the current settings item. When you click on current settings, it's going to give you all of the current settings that are programmed in the main menu. So your louver position, if you have an indoor unit with a louver, it's going to give you your schedule, enabled or disabled status, off timer, and whether or not it's enabled or disabled. It's also going to give you the current screen display configuration. So for example, if you still have it set to standard out of the box, and it's not showing you the room temperature, and you're wondering why, even though we talked about it earlier on in the video, if you're on the phone with your service technician, they can see that, well, they'll hear it over the phone. You'll tell them that your current display configuration is standard, and they can walk you through how to change that from standard to either the simple display option or to the detailed display option. The last thing we're going to talk about today is the maintenance information. There's not a whole lot to talk about here. When you click on maintenance information, all it's going to give you is the most recent error code. So if you need that for any reason, maybe you had a problem, the problem went away, but by the time you got through to the contractor and you're on the phone with them, they want to know what was the latest error code. You can tell them by going into the main menu, scrolling down to maintenance information, clicking on that, and then you'll be able to tell them, hey, my last error code was U4 or whatever it was, and then they can help diagnose the problem from there. Well guys, that's it for today. Thank you so much for sticking with me until the end. I know that was a lot of content to get through, but if you enjoyed the video, please click the like button below. It really helps out the channel. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content. Thank you so much for watching Inverter Always. I hope you have an awesome day.